session just before, they were talking about metadata, and I think when providing that metadata level of knowledge across this data to give insight into the content, it allows you to helps you to help define these policies and provide insight. And we've worked with many organizations. We bring legal and compliance teams together with the IT organizations, and the conversations are very challenging, very difficult. When you start putting in some of these metadata profile reports in there, and they start looking at it, things become a little easier. So it's like looking at data even that's aged out and hasn't been touched in 7 years. It's one thing, does it have value? Nobody's using it, so you may assume that it has no value, but how do you determine that? Should it be kept, should it not be kept, and so on. So we're going to talk a little bit about policy here, legal notice. So I think, there's charts and charts out there about the growth of data. Unstructured data, and really what I'm talking about today is more the unstructured content, the stuff that users are creating inside the firewall, user documents and so on, and email. Email is one of the biggest areas of unstructured data growth. And you can see stats and stats that it's growing significantly, and users are continuing to create more and more content. And the numbers, 40 zettabytes, it's just beyond what people can understand. So I think what people are interpreting as big data and how to leverage big data. What we're talking about is more the unstructured user-generated content, like documents, spreadsheets, things like that, even unstructured content, which there is, they're knowledge workers, there's a lot of value in that content, how to leverage that and talk about that within the big data conversation. So, some other stats here showing, how it's impacting you. A lot of the challenge that the customers are seeing, and a lot of times the reason they talk to us is because they're facing increased cost in their data center. So, IT organizations are saying, hey, we continue to store stuff, we have no idea what it is, and we want to make sure that we manage it correctly or so on. So it's not that storage, storage is a bad thing and data is a bad thing. It's like people just have no knowledge of what exists. And when you talk to the IT organization saying, I know when I go through a migration, I know that a large majority of what I'm migrating has no value or no one's touching it or no one's using it. Those are challenges that IT organizations are facing, but the people that are defining policies need to determine that. Does it have value? Should it be kept? Should it not be kept? And there are legal implications to doing so. So I think when we engage with customers, it's usually when there's a hardware situation where they become maxed out or they need to make some decisions or some replatforming decisions. And that's when they come in and like, hey, let's start looking at this content. Just the increasing effort spent on maintenance and the cost of cooling it and managing it, inability to conduct e-discovery and compliance. So you're seeing data center issues coming on top, IT budget and data center issues. You're seeing a lot of legal IT and compliance and support and IT satisfaction issues. And I think even in the earlier panel session, there was a lot of conversation about big data and storage, but it quickly turned into a conversation about legal and compliance and the law and keeping stuff. Well, what can we keep? What can we not keep? So I think the conversation around big data and policy is not really just a data policy about managing your data from a data center point of view. It's about legal and compliance and protecting the organization, and also extracting the value of that content as well. So when you think about unstructured data, there's depending on the type of organization, what's growing the fastest. You can see email and is growing significant volumes compared to other data, office documents, and so on. So the challenge here really is the value of email. Email is really where your knowledge workers are creating a lot of those conversations and so on. Just think about email within financial services, within an R&D organization. There's a lot of value in those conversations. What has value and what doesn't have value. And what also has a liability as well. So developing a policy that can determine that is very important. So, there's a lot of reporting and analytics. I think, what we provide and what we do is we focus on creating a metadata view into the file level. There's a lot of tools that are out there, and there's a lot of confusion in the market as to whether tools exist that provide that level of analytics. A lot of tools look at access logs, which are really more security-centric. So they're going to look at who accessed what files and so on, and what data and so on. There's block-level capacity planning, which the storage vendors have used for years for hardware planning purposes. And then there's file system metadata tools. What we're focused really on in the policy is really developing a file-level metadata view. So it's a file file-centric view of the world, so you can look at the specific content. And when we're trying to manage policy around big data, around the big unstructured data, is we need to look at the data itself and look at the analysis. And a lot of the organizations we work at with, implement this technology and look at the content, really in seeing it for the first time, using charts and graphs and views into it to see an idea of what exists there. One of the areas that's really, I think, is fascinating, that's going to be growing over the next decade is really the analytics, the real deep analytics, pushing this content into Hadoop or looking at other analytical tools. So you can teach your organization that this document is a contract, this has value to our organization, this document is research that we value, these are the types of things, and using those analytical tools to go in there and mine that content and get it where it needs to be. But providing this file level metadata allows the IT organizations to work with the business units in order to provide a level of knowledge so they can determine the disposition of the content. There's many different dispositions that our clients are using here. So, in the big unstructured data, the traditional big data conversation deals with around, more user-generated, content versus transactional data. So we're looking at, what we're specifically our customers are struggling with is email. And I think when you see them trying to extract the value of email, mostly from a legal or a compliance point of view, it becomes very challenging just because it's a very dynamic environment, very growing environment. But looking at it from a legal point of view, which is really more the liability point of view, is one thing, but looking at it from using that data as an asset. So I think you see people like Amazon that are using web transactional data and making decisions for customers on, hey, you should be interested in these products because you're looking at this content. There's a lot of value in email that exists out there in conversations and what people are interested in, what they're talking about, that could be mined as well internally. Not as easy as more the web-based data, but I think in the future, looking at email as a tool that you can mine that content and conversations, there's a lot of interest in that. So mining the value from that unstructured data, and our customers are asking for that, as there's a lot of intellectual property, or there's a lot of knowledge worker, content that exists within our corporation. How do we mine that and extract that value out in the big data world?
So the transactional data, are people putting that in an unstructured environment or file system, or don't they normally keep it in databases structured?
Yeah, in database stuff. So the email and that content is in its native environment. So what they're looking at doing is finding the stuff that's of value, and they're pushing it in either archives or pushing it into other repositories that they can use analytical tools on that content. So moving it into those environments. So whether it be moving content into an email, into an analytical engine to analyze it, and so on. Yeah. So I mean, what we're looking at is, the big data world is big data is just, separating the good from the bad versus better data. So I think, what we're focused on is providing profiling tools that allow you to look at data and profile it and determine what has value and what doesn't have value. And I think a lot of the challenge, when you look at these conversations that have been going on this week, is just the massive volumes of content that exists. How do you interpret it? How do you keep it? An IT organization has spent a lot of time of replicating and copying and protecting data. But when you start talking to the policy folks, it's like, should we be keeping that from a legal point of view is one conversation. And other organizations is like, how do we mine the value of that content and be able to leverage it long term? So I think the classification conversation, there's been a lot of talk about, new talk about data classification. Data classification we talked about maybe almost a decade ago, but now people are talking about how do we classify to determine what has business value, what doesn't have value, looking at redundant data, risk-based data, all the legal content, and working with the business units to determine that disposition. So our most successful customers have been ones where IT organizations have worked really with the business units to really provide the insight that they need into the content. And I know the previous conversation was about how do we provide that metadata view, or somebody mentioned the metadata valley, is how metadata is going to be very helpful. Metadata is kind of a four-letter word these days out in the press, but I think people can mine that metadata and provide the value they need so they can work with the business units. And I think one of our clients was working with their legal counsel that said we keep too much stuff. They're a financial services firm. We keep too much stuff. We need to really kind of clean stuff up and manage it a little bit more appropriately. So the IT organization is working with them the different business units provide metadata profiles into that content so they can say, hey, you know what, this is what you have. You know, it's the same idea as if you pay your cell phone bill once a month and they say, hey, you know what, trust us, you used, you know, this many minutes, you used 800 minutes this month. It's like, without providing you a detailed list of what it was. It's like, that doesn't happen. So I think the IT organization saying, hey, you know what, you used this much capacity and this is kind of what it is, this is a breakdown of it, you can make better decisions about it. And getting rid of what's no longer required. I mean, I think people are afraid of deleting data. I mean, it's kind of outside the realm of storage professionals to delete stuff. They want to keep it and make copies of it over and over again. But you know, more and more we've got customers that have decades and decades of data that are like, especially even on legacy backup tapes, that they're like, we need to manage this and get rid of what we no longer need. So I mean, it's really, you know, what we talk about is turning the big data into better data. So what we're talking about is really data profiling technology. It's very high-speed indexing, and it's very file-centric. It's not looking at access logs and things like that. So it looks at the files, specifically files and email unstructured files. It integrates in the storage environment, maintains this unstructured and indexing unstructured content, supports both also primary and secondary storage. So we have the ability to also provide metadata profile of legacy backup tapes. So I'll talk about some of the projects that we're doing there where people are looking into their historical content. And even when you have conversations with folks, I mean, we talked earlier about HIPAA compliance, people, you know, I ask them, you know, what do you do about data, you know, patient records on legacy backup tapes? And they're like, you know, we don't know. We don't know what we're doing there. So there's going to be these regulations and these compliance requirements ongoing where you need to be able to provide policy against that content, whether it's online or offline. And then, you know, it's an enterprise-ready environment. It's you know, I think, you know, what we've done is provide our customer that layer on top of the storage infrastructure that it provides them a view into the content so they can determine what has value and what doesn't have value. And I think there's a lot that has to come here. I mean, the analytics on top of it to be able to start analyzing that stuff and mining that stuff. A lot of our customers are asking for stuff that's not quite there yet, but I see it coming. So what is metadata? I mean, it's not, you know, it's not an evil thing like consumers are worried about, you know, the NSA snooping on their content. It's, you know, it's really looking at the file level stuff. You know, when stuff was last accessed, when stuff was last modified, the size of the data location, who owns it, file properties. Also have the ability to go full text into the content, so you can do things like PI, you know, search for personal identifiable information, social security number, credit card numbers, things like that. You know, backup time and so on. It's really kind of getting rich content on the unstructured data or metadata level content on the unstructured files and so on. So really the focus here is to be able to scan these using high-speed scanning indexing technology to generate that rich metadata level environment. A lot of our customers are looking at, I mean, a lot of them are interested in the really user shares and things like that. I mean, the user shares are probably the least managed data that's out there. You know, we have one manufacturing company that has a 5 petabyte user share, which is, you know, pretty significant size. And that's just a lot of data they know may or may not have value. They're worried about what's on there. Doesn't, you know, should we be looking at that stuff? And it kind of gets pushed as they continue to increase that. You get to a point of 5 petabytes. It's like, listen, we need to do something about this. Figure out, should we continue to grow that? When do you stop? Okay. So they look at also departmental servers, email environments, like wherever their biggest pain points are. You know, and then they go and create and extract this metadata level unstructured data so they can search and analyze it. And there's tools, and I'll show you some examples of that. You know, queries and filters on top of that so they can determine the disposition of the content. So it's really kind of scanning it. It's an ongoing process to be able to scan it. And some of these projects are in the petabytes of data. They're massive projects. And the technology now is such that you can get to this level of knowledge. And, you know, I was happy to hear the conversation earlier about metadata, and we just need to have better metadata intelligence on this stuff so we can make proper disposition decisions is exactly right. So I think, you know, one of the concerns when you implement this technology is performance and format and how it's going to impact your network. So one of the things that we did was we support, obviously, NFS or SYS crawling through the content, also support NDMP for NDMP-enabled servers so you can do high-speed indexing of that data. And you can really control and throttle bandwidth and support incremental updates and so on. So it's an infrastructure, an indexing infrastructure that would sit as part of the data center environment to provide that level of knowledge. And here, again, we're talking mostly about unstructured user data, really documents, spreadsheets, things like that, as well as email. Email is a huge pain point out there. So that's where a lot of the conversations and agreements and attachments and stuff, the email is very sensitive, especially from a legal point of view. One of the critical points here, and I think Active Directory provides great insight into this data, is integration and leveraging that environment. So you can tell within Active Directory, active users versus inactive users. So traditionally, when someone leaves the organization, their account will be labeled inactive.